and a sense of attachment to one's country or state. This attachment can be a combination of different feelings for things such as the language of one's homeland, and its ethnic, cultural, political, or historical aspects. It may encompass a set of concepts closely related to nationalism, mostly civic nationalism and sometimes cultural nationalism. The notions of civic virtue and group dedication can be found in cultures globally throughout history. For Enlightenment thinkers of 18th century Europe, loyalty to the state was chiefly considered in contrast to loyalty to the church. It was argued that clerics should not be allowed to teach in public schools since their patrie was heaven, so they could not inspire a love of the homeland in their students. One of the most influential proponents of this notion of patriotism was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Enlightenment thinkers also criticized what they saw as the excess of patriotism. In 1774, Samuel Johnson published The Patriot, a critique of what he viewed as false patriotism. On the evening of April 7, 1775, he made the famous statement, "Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel." James Boswell, who reported this comment in his Life of Johnson, does not provide context for the quote, and it has therefore been argued that Johnson was in fact attacking a false use of patriotism by contemporaries such as John Stuart, the Earl of Bute, the Patriot minister, and his supporters. Johnson spoke elsewhere in favor of what he considered true patriotism. However, there is no direct evidence to contradict the widely held belief that Johnson's famous remark was a criticism of patriotism itself. Many patriotic people take pride in sharing a distinct, common culture, believing it to be central to their national identity and unity. Many are devoted to the preservation of their traditional culture and encourage cultural assimilation by people from other cultures. However, some of the more civic forms of patriotism tend to de-emphasize ethnic culture in favor of a shared political culture. Philosophical issues. Patriotism may be strengthened by adherence to a national religion, a civil religion, or even a theocracy. This is the opposite of the separation of church and state demanded by the Enlightenment thinkers who saw patriotism and faith as similar and opposed forces. Michael Billig and Jean Bethke Elshtain both argued that the difference between patriotism and faith is difficult to discern and relies largely on the attitude of the one doing the labeling. Christopher Heath Wellman, professor of philosophy at Washington University in St. Louis, says a popular view of the patriotist position is robust obligations to compatriots and only minimal Samaritan responsibilities to foreigners. Wellman calls this position patriotist rather than nationalist to single out the members of territorial, political units rather than cultural groups. Voltaire stated that it is lamentable, that to be a good patriot one must become the enemy of the rest of mankind. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that the cheapest sort of pride is national pride, for if a man is proud of his own nation, it argues that he has no qualities of his own of which a person can be proud. Kodoka Shosui, a famous Japanese anarchist of the late 19th/early 20th century, devoted a large section of his widely read Imperialism, Monster of the 20th Century to a condemnation of patriotism. 17.5 One of the many arguments is based on the Confucian value of empathy. I am as convinced as Mencius that any man would rush without hesitation to rescue a child who was about to fall into a well. A human being moved by such selfless love and charity does not pause to think whether the child is a family member or a close relative. When he rescues the child from danger, he does not even ask himself whether the child is his own or belongs to another. Patriotism is used to dehumanize others whom we would naturally have empathy for. He argues, patriotism is a discriminating and arbitrary sentiment confined to those who belong to a single nation-state or live together within common national borders, a sentiment cultivated and used by militarists in their drive for war. Marxists have taken various stances regarding patriotism. On one hand, Karl Marx famously stated that the working men have no country and that the supremacy of the proletariat will cause national differences to vanish still faster. The same view is promoted by present-day Trotskyists such as Alan Woods, who is in favor of tearing down all frontiers and creating a socialist world commonwealth. On the other hand, Marxist-Leninists and Maoists are usually in favor of socialist patriotism based on the theory of socialism in one country. Against primordial arguments in favor of national patriotism, Eric Hobsbawm wrote that such a concept was, for most of human history, so remote from the real experience of most human beings. Anarchists oppose patriotism. This was exemplified by Emma Goldman, who stated, "Indeed, conceit, arrogance, and egotism are the essentials of patriotism. Let me illustrate. Patriotism assumes that our globe is divided into little spots, each one surrounded by an iron gate. Those who have had the fortune of being born on some particular spot, consider themselves better, nobler, grander, and more intelligent than the living beings inhabiting any other spot. It is, therefore, the duty of everyone living in that chosen spot to fight, kill, and die in an attempt to impose his superiority upon all the others." Region-specific issues. In the European Union, thinkers such as Jürgen Habermas have advocated a Euro-patriotism, but patriotism in Europe is usually directed at the nation-state and more often than not coincides with Euroscepticism. Several surveys have tried to measure patriotism, such as the Correlates of War project, which found some correlation between war propensity and patriotism. The results from different studies are time-dependent. For example, according to the project, patriotism in Germany before World War I ranked at or near the top. According to a study by the Identity Foundation, 60% of Germans were proud of their country in 2009. According to Statista, the figure was as high as 83%. In a 2020 Pew Research Center survey, 53% of participants surveyed in Germany said they were proud of their country, the highest figure among the nations surveyed. France, 45%, United Kingdom, 41%, United States, 39%. Since 1981, the World Values Survey polls for national values and beliefs. The survey includes the question, "Are you proud to be insert nationality?" The answers to which range from 1, "Not proud," to 4, "Very proud." They then use the average answer given to create comparisons between not only nations but also high and low income citizens. In 2022, U.S. adults who said they were extremely proud to be an American hit an all-time low, according to a Gallup poll. Simply stated, patriotism is the feeling of love for one's country. Demonstrating patriotism, being patriotic, is one of the necessities of being the stereotypical good citizen. Patriotism, like many well-intentioned actions, can be harmful when taken to an extreme. Key takeaways. Patriotism is the feeling and expression of love for one's home country, along with a feeling of unity with those who share those feelings. Though it shares patriotism's love of country, nationalism is the belief that one's home country is superior to all others. While considered a necessary attribute of good citizenship, when patriotism becomes politically mandatory, it can cross a line. Patriotism definition. Along with love, patriotism is the feeling of pride, devotion, and attachment to a homeland, as well as a feeling of attachment to other patriotic citizens. Feelings of attachment may be bound further by factors like race or ethnicity, culture, religious beliefs, or history. Historic perspective. Patriotism originated some 2,000 years before the rise of nationalism in the 19th century. Greek and especially Roman antiquity provide the roots for a philosophy of political patriotism that conceives loyalty to the patria, the power that the male head of a family exercised over his children, like loyalty to a political conception of the republic. It is associated with the love of law and common liberty, the search for common good, and the duty to behave justly toward one's country. The Roman meaning of patria is repeated in the context of the Italian city-states of the 15th century, such as Naples and Venice, as representing the common liberty of the city, which can only be safeguarded by the citizen's civic spirit. To the Renaissance period Italian diplomat, author, philosopher, and historian Niccolò Machiavelli, the love of common liberty enabled citizens to see their private and particular interests as part of the common good and help them to resist corruption and tyranny. While a love of the city is typically intermixed with pride in its military strength and cultural superiority, the political institutions and the city's way of life form the distinctive focal point of this kind of patriotic attachment. To love the city is to be willing to sacrifice one's own good, including one's life, for common liberty. While patriotism is evident throughout history, it was not always considered a civic virtue. In 18th century Europe, for example, devotion to the state was considered a betrayal of devotion to the church. Other 18th century scholars also found fault with what they considered excessive patriotism. In 1775, Samuel Johnson, whose 1774 essay The Patriot criticized those who claimed false devotion to Britain, famously called patriotism the last refuge of the scoundrel. Arguably, America's first patriots were its founding fathers, who risked their lives to create a nation that reflected their visions of freedom with equality. They summarized this vision in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In that single sentence, the founders dispelled the long-held belief of the ruling British monarchy that an individual's pursuit of personal happiness was nothing more than a disloyal act of self-indulgence. Instead, they acknowledged that the right of each citizen to pursue personal fulfillment was essential to the qualities, such as ambition and creativity, that would fuel the nation's economy. As a result, the pursuit of happiness became and remains the force behind America's entrepreneurial system of free market capitalism. The Declaration of Independence further states, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In this phrase, the Founding Fathers rejected the autocratic rule of monarchs and confirmed the revolutionary principle of government of the people, by the people, as the basis of American democracy and the reason the preamble to the U.S. Constitution begins with the words "We the people." Examples of patriotism. There are countless ways of showing patriotism. Standing for the national anthem and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance are obvious ones. Perhaps more importantly, many of the most beneficial acts of patriotism in the U.S. celebrate and strengthen the country. A few of these include participating in the representative democracy by registering to vote and voting in elections, volunteering for community service or running for elected government office, serving on juries, obeying all laws and paying taxes, understanding the rights, freedoms, and responsibilities contained in the U.S. Constitution. Patriotism vs. nationalism. While the words patriotism and nationalism were once considered synonyms, they have taken on different connotations. While both are the feelings of love people feel for their country, the values upon which those feelings are based are very different. Feelings of patriotism are based on the positive values the country embraces, like freedom, justice, and equality. The patriot believes the system of government and the people of their country are inherently good and work together for a better quality of life. In contrast, feelings of nationalism are based on a belief that one's country is superior to all others. It also carries a connotation of distrust or disapproval of other countries, leading to the assumption that other countries are rivals. While patriots do not automatically denigrate other countries, nationalists do, sometimes to the point of calling for their country's global dominance. Nationalism, through its protectionist beliefs, is the polar opposite of globalism. Historically, the effects of nationalism have been both positive and negative. While it has driven independence movements, like the Zionist movement that created modern Israel, it was also a key factor in the rise of the German Nazi Party and the Holocaust. Patriotism versus nationalism arose as a political issue when former President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron verbally sparred over the meaning of the terms. At a rally on October 23, 2018, Trump defended his populist Make America Great Again platform and protectionist policies of tariffs on imports, officially declaring himself a nationalist. A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much, he said. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sorts of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay. I'm a nationalist. President Macron, speaking at the 100th Armistice Day ceremony in Paris on November 11, 2018, offered a different meaning of nationalism. He defined nationalism as putting our nation first, and not caring about the others. By rejecting the interests of other countries, Macron asserted, we erase what a nation holds dearest, what gives it life, what makes it great and what is essential, its moral values. Pros and cons of patriotism. Few countries survive and prosper without some degree of patriotic feelings among their people. A love of country and shared pride bring people together, helping them endure challenges. Without shared patriotic beliefs, colonial Americans may not have chosen to travel the road to independence from England. More recently, patriotism brought the American people together to overcome the Great Depression and achieve victory in World War II. The potential downside of patriotism is that if it becomes a mandatory political doctrine, it can turn groups of people against each other and lead the country to reject its fundamental values. A few examples from United States history include: as early as 1798, extreme patriotism, spurred by fears of a war with France, led Congress to enact the Alien and Sedition Acts, allowing the jailing of certain U.S. immigrants without due process of law and restricting the First Amendment freedoms of speech and the press. In 1919, early fears of communism triggered the Palmer raids, resulting in the arrest and immediate deportation without trial of more than 10,000 German and Russian American immigrants. After the December 7, 1941, Japanese air raid on Pearl Harbor, the Franklin Roosevelt administration ordered some 127,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry imprisoned in internment camps for the duration of World War II. During the Red Scare of the early 1950s, the McCarthy era saw thousands of Americans accused without evidence by the government of being communists or communist sympathizers. After a series of so-called investigations conducted by Senator Joseph McCarthy, hundreds of those accused were ostracized and prosecuted for their political beliefs. Thank you for watching this video.